what is CORF and why do we do what we do. Our mission is to raise the profile, develop capacity and increase opportunities for outdoor recreation in Queensland. So Live Life Outdoors is our tagline. Our friends at Outdoors Victoria have got the same tagline. We know who had it first, but anyway, that's not the point here. It's all about encapsulating that purpose. CORF takes a very inclusive approach to outdoor recreation. So we include outdoor education and adventure therapy, adventure racing, outdoor fitness activities, and adventure tourism within the definition of what is an outdoor recreation and what outdoor activities are all about. So the Outdoor Council of Australia is the national peak body in this space, and it recognises that outdoor activities are undertaken for a range of reasons, including recreation, education, tourism, personal development and corporate development. So just to let you know, I'm a board member of the OCA, and I think we've also got some other OCA board members joining the webinar. I haven't checked the full list to see if they've all signed in, but they're a group of people from right across the country who voluntarily give back to the outdoor industry. So if you're not aware of who they are, have a look at the OCA website. There's information there. And the reason I'm talking about the Outdoor Council of Australia is that it is the organisation that's responsible for the ongoing management of the Australian Adventure Activity Standard and Good Practice Guides. So it's also responsible, I guess, now for all of the documents that are available through its website and also the standalone Australian AAS website, which, as you should be aware, is australianaas.org.au. And yeah, that's just that's the go-to place for information about the standard as a standalone. All right. A little bit about standards and why do we have them. I really like this quote from Charles Reb Gregg, who's from the Outdoor Safety Institute in the United States. We probably know that not everything out of the USA is perfect, but I think this quote's pretty good. So we've had, I'll just check, we had over 100 people register for the webinar, and I think we've got 70 or more people on the webinar already. So I guess that shows that there are a lot of people committed to seeking excellence in your operations, in your quality programming, and your good customer service. So I'd really like to thank you for your time today and acknowledge that you are making a difference for so many people out there. What are the Australian Adventure Activity Standards? So this slide, I'm not going to read it all out, but it has a description of what the Australian AAS is. So a voluntary good practice framework for planning and delivery of led outdoor activities. There's going to be more information on the defined elements of that description in the next few slides, but I think it's worth taking a moment just to discuss why the Australian AAS and Good Practice Guides have been delivered. It's been about having one framework for planning and delivery of led outdoor activities across our country. For the last 10 or 20 years, various states had their own versions of adventure activity standards for a range of activities. Some states and territories didn't have any formal standards, so operators either developed their own systems or sought guidance from the states who had published standards. So the Australian AAS/Good Practice Guides was endorsed by all state and territory ministers for recreation at a meeting on Friday, the 1st of November 2019. So that endorsement was the finalisation of the development of the standard and Good Practice Guides, which has been project managed by Outdoors Victoria for the last few years. And we need to give a big thank you to Andrew Knight, the CEO of Outdoors Victoria, and Murray Irwin, Outdoors Victoria's project officer, who did a tremendous amount of work on this project, along with the volunteers who contributed to all the technical working committees, the project steering committee, and consultants and other members of the industry who provided the project with their wisdom experience and opinions. And I probably can't say that too much. Like, this has been an amazing joint effort as we've gone along. So, and I guess the other part of this is the standard and the good practice guides aren't just about safety outdoors. They're about responsible delivery. So that's safety, but it's also environmental management. It's also about what's important within the operations that you undertake out there. So don't just think this is only about safety of the participants and the operators. It's also about what's the right way of doing these activities. So this is the definition of dependent participant. I'm a bit scared by the image that I've chosen there, but the definition is important because the standard and good practice guides are actually limited in scope to situations where dependent participants are involved. And the information provided in the standards, it could be extended to situations involving non-dependent participants, but it has been written with dependent participants in mind. So the information there about participants relying upon the activity provider is important to bear in mind. Having dependent participants is a very normal situation in many aspects of outdoor activities. It's a regular thing for you to have particular expertise that I need for me to participate in that activity. It applies right across our industry, adventure tourism, outdoor education, corporate team building, bush adventure therapy, and outdoor recreation. And an important point to make here is that whether the activity is delivered by paid or volunteer workers is not the question. The question is whether the participants in the activity rely on the activity provider for guidance or instruction. I just want to make that point clear too. I deliberately use the term paid or volunteer workers. I think if anyone thinks that a volunteer isn't a worker, they've probably never been a volunteer. So just to put that one there too. So just having a quick scroll through the questions. Mark, have you got a comment?
It looks like the slides aren't progressing at the moment for some reason.
Oh, okay.
The audio is quite bad, and the suggestion was made maybe to turn off the video. Turn off your video.
Turn off my video. Okay, I can do that. You've probably lost the picture of my moustache, so apologies for that. But yeah, it's better off if you can hear me than if you can see me. So I hope that's improved it. There's a question there about are we able to access PowerPoints after the meeting? Yes, we will make the slides available afterwards, after the webinar. Let me know if that has actually fixed up that problem with the slides. So I'm not sure how we're going now. Have we got the good practice framework up on the screen? Not yet. All right. That's a good old technology. Who'd have thought it would slow down all the way through? Without wasting too much time, I might just see if I can't close the slideshow down and bring it back up and see if that that fixes it up. So just bear with me for one moment. So now you should have a picture of my tent when I went camping out at Birdsville. Let's just see where I'm at. I'll just consult with Mark. Are we back on track, mate? No. This is a little bit frustration, isn't it? What have you got? Okay, I'll close down the PowerPoint and just start again and see if I can get it working that way. How about Mark sharing my screen and share it again and see if that does it? So I'm very apologetic for this. We've actually done some. Mark and I have done quite a few test runs, and of course we didn't have any problems. But when we go live, that's the interesting time. So let me go back in, and I'll just see if I can get this happening. So we have the good practice framework on your screens, I hope. I'm really sorry about that, but hopefully we can get back on track and hopefully not cost you too much time. So we'll still try to stick to the hour despite those couple of minutes. Also, if anyone can let me know if the audio's come good as well. So let's keep on cracking on. This slide about the good practice framework, which we finally got up on screen, I hope it was worth the wait. It shows how the elements of the framework coexist. So if you're reviewing your processes for mountain biking or your challenge course, you should compare your policies and procedures to the standard, the good practice guide, and the activity-specific good practice guide for that activity. So it sounds a bit complicated, but it's also a very comprehensive approach to the standards and what's expected to meet good practice for your participants. So if you deliver a range of activities, your knowledge of the standard and the core good practice guide would be applied equally across those activities when you apply the information in the activity-specific good practice guide. So if you only deliver one activity, you should still consider the standard and the core good practice guide along with your particular activity-specific good practice guide for that, whether it's mountain biking or bushwalking, etc. A range of activities, which we'll get to. And hopefully the slide has progressed and you've got the next slide, which shows all of the different activities that are covered by good practice guides. So again, I mentioned it earlier, but we had an amazing group of volunteer experts on a series of technical working groups, and they contributed to the development of all of these activity-specific good practice guides. So this complements the work done on the standard and the core good practice guide, which are also based on the work of another technical working group. So it's quite amazing the effort that's been done by the experts within our industry right across the country. And yeah, you'll probably get sick of hearing it, but I'm genuinely grateful for the work that was done there to get to this point. It is very tempting to jump straight to the activity-specific good practice guide for your activity, but you do need to read that in the context of the standard and the core good practice guide. So just want to flag that you've got to have that understanding of the first two documents before diving into the activity-specific ones. And that applies right across the board. And I didn't just use diving in purely because snorkeling's there at the bottom. You do need to consider that. So you'll have seen that list of all the activities, but there's also, for some Australian states that had state-based adventure activities, which includes Queensland, you'll find that not all the activities that were covered in your state have been covered in the new Australian AAS/good practice guides. So that was due to differing priorities and budgetary issues. We just couldn't cover all of the outdoor activities during the Australian AAS project. And there's no immediate plans to develop activity-specific good practice guides for any activities that aren't covered by the Australian AAS. That might happen in the future when the Australian AAS and good practice guides are reviewed, but that's going to depend on the budget that is available for that review. So the Queensland Adventure Activity Standards for four-wheel driving, surfing and trail bike touring haven't been superseded. And I guess that does not mean that the Australian AAS, so the standard or the good practice guide, doesn't provide any guidance for those activities. So the standard and the core good practice guide are still relevant because they apply to all adventure activities. So I'd suggest using the activity-specific elements of the state-based AAS as a guiding document for planning and conducting the activity, and read that in context of the new Australian Standard and Good Practice Guide. So it'll mean your overall operations would be consistent if you were conducting surfing and also running mountain biking or stand-up paddleboard work. So the different of some of that, you could have a blend of the state-based standards and the Australian standards. So I guess that's part of the complexity of the space we operate in, but also the fact that there is guidance from two different spots is not necessarily a bad thing. The alternative is you could continue to just use your current procedures and policies for these particular ones, which I assume you've mapped to the previous standard. And it's really up to you how you review and how often you review your procedures and your policies. So just wanted to flag that and get it out there. So we've made it this far. Most people seem to still be with us. I think the audio's picked up a little. Thank you for giving us that feedback that it's come good. So it was maybe the moustache was interfering with the audio, but I hope not. The big question really is, how do you implement the Australian AAS and Good Practice Guides in your operations? And I'm deliberately saying, how do you do this? Because how it happens, how the implementation happens is going to change depending on how each of you operates. The way you conduct any adventure activity and what policies or procedures you have in place are really a matter for you. But it is something that's influenced by various factors in your environment, such as the expectations of your insurers, the legal system in which you operate, other policies of your organisation, the policies of the land and water managers responsible for the places you access, and by your own experience in particular spaces and conducting particular activities. So the Australian AAS Core Good Practice Guide and the activity-specific Good Practice Guides are really just another part of the environment in which we operate. The great thing is that this part of the operating environment has been developed by the range of experts from across the country and within the outdoor sector. So I'd suggest that can't always be said for your insurers and the legal system, and may not even hold true for all of the organisational policies that apply to you. And I think we need to think about that as far as why is the AAS and Good Practice Guides worth bothering about, but it's because it's an industry developed tool for you. So a few hints on how you should implement the Australian AAS into your procedures. My number one hint is, don't dismiss what you already have in place. If you have policies and procedures that work for you, the chances are they will work under the Australian AAS. It hasn't changed overnight how to responsibly run an outdoor activity. I think you should critically compare your existing practices to what's recommended in the standard and the Good Practice Guides and assess whether you need to make any changes. You'd be effectively comparing what you already have to the collected advice of a range of experts in their fields. And you've got that advice for free. So I think that's a good point, just to consider what you've got and compare it to what the other advice is. Secondly, don't despair. It's not a major, it doesn't have to be a major chore. So I know that most people don't immediately think of policy review when considering their ultimate fun-filled day. But this is actually an opportunity to do an update, which may be overdue anyway, and ensure that you are operating in what's recognised as a safe and responsible manner. My third hint is, don't just follow blindly. I think everyone should be prepared to disagree with something that's written in the Australian AAS or Good Practice Guides. Just because something's handed down as the collected wisdom of experts doesn't mean it necessarily works in your particular setting. Remember that you are also an expert at what you do. My word of caution on this one is that if you identify a particular section of the standard or the good practice guides that does not enhance safety or responsible delivery in your setting, I'd suggest documenting the statement and explaining in your policy or procedure the reasons behind a decision not to follow that guidance which has been provided. So a couple of reasons for documenting it. Firstly, to show that you are well aware of the standard and the good practice guide, and you've made a deliberate decision based on particular reasons. And I'd suggest that's crucial if you ever find yourself having to justify why you chose not to follow this expert guidance, whether you're justifying it to your boss, your insurer, a court, or even just justifying it to yourself. And on that point, I'd probably need to step back a little and say, don't forget the Australian Adventure Activity Standard and Good Practice Guides are voluntary documents, so it's not about compulsory that everyone follows it, but they'll also be the documents that I would expect will be referred to as an industry guide, as the Good Practice Guide. So there may be situations where you have to explain why you didn't follow what it says in here. And if you've got that documented and you followed your procedure that you had reasons for doing that, I'd rather have those reasons written on a piece of paper than have it look as if you're making up reasons at a later date. So that's the bit there that I think is critical. If you're going to do something different to what it says in the standard or the Good Practice Guide, be very conscious of why you're making that decision. And I'd also say, if you can't document it clearly, maybe have another think about it. You should be able to document reasons behind your decision. And sorry, my second one was, in documenting that, it also makes it easier for you to provide feedback to the next review of the adventure activity standards. If you've already written it, then you can just provide that feedback when we come to that point, so it'll improve the system for other people. So the 3 points so far: don't dismiss what you already have in place, don't despair, it doesn't have to be a chore, and don't just follow the standards blindly. My fourth hint for you is, don't be too stubborn. Just consider that the guidance in the standard and the good practice guides was harvested from industry experts who gave their time and expertise, and make an informed decision about changes to the way you operate. So just have a think about that. This might, as I said earlier, it's an opportunity to review how you operate, but don't just say, that's the way I do it, so I'm not going to change it. Maybe just have a little think about it. Are there some pearls of wisdom in there that you can take from there and improve the way you operate? Because this is a big part of what the Australian Adventure Activity Standards are all about. It's improving the way everyone operates in the outdoors with dependent participants. And that take is, if someone is dependent on you, you should be doing the right thing by them as well. And so my fifth one is, be prepared to share your learnings. Don't just update your policy or procedure and leave it stored on your computer system or on your shelf. You need to roll that out and explain the changes and reasons for any changes to all of your team. You may need to update your training manual. You may need to update the information you provide to your clients, your insurers, and any other key stakeholders. You also should consider discussing any changes with industry colleagues who you respect. They might have encountered the same issue as you and might have come up with a different way of dealing with it. They might have had a different interpretation of what a section of the standard means. So just have a think about that. These are documents that are about providing guidance to you in the industry. You've all had opportunities to provide feedback on them as we went along. That's probably the bit I did skip over. There was a whole lot of public consultation on all these documents. So I would suggest that there are opportunities in that space to provide, to discuss it with your colleagues, and really look at what this thing, and that can also be capture those learnings, and that could be an opportunity to feed that into the future as well. Just going to do a quick scan and just see if there's any questions as we go along. Mark's answered a few as he's gone along. I've got one there, a question still on implementation. So at the moment, you should have implementation and an outward bound risk management policy that I stole from the internet. Thank you, outward bound. Borrowed is probably a better term, but it was freely available. So yes, we are still on that same guideline. This one's had a fair chunk of information for you. I haven't moved on for a little while. I will move on now. So still on implementation, I guess, and I just wanted to bring you back to this diagram about how the standard and the core good practice guide and the activity-specific good practice guides work together. So when you come to review the standard, you really need to consider the three aspects of it. The great bit is once you get to considering the different activities that you're going to deliver with dependent participants, then you really once you've got a knowledge of the standard and the core good practice guide, you can get down to the detail information that's provided in the activity specific good practice guides. So I guess the question I have is really, does anyone have any specific queries about implementation as we go along? There's some questions on there about a few technical questions about life jackets. As I said at the start, this isn't really specific about those sort of things as we go along, but we can have a look at some of those questions as we go through. But really I guess the question is, on the implementation side of things, are there any questions on where we've got to with those sort of things? Do those 5 points that I made make sense to everyone? And are there questions you have on, particular aspects of why you should document it or how you should document the decisions you've made and what sort of policies you really need to have in place? I guess I'm taking this from the point of view of assuming that organisations have policies and procedures in place to start with. I'm hoping everyone does. If you were setting up a whole from scratch, an organisation from scratch to tomorrow, my suggestion would be that the first step would be being familiar with these standards, but you also need your expertise, and I guess, don't undervalue your expertise. If you're going to write a policy or a procedure on how you're going to deliver outdoor activities, use the standard and the good practice guides as a source of information. But what you need to do is put that into context for your operating environment. So don't just slavishly follow what's in the standard or the good practice guide. It really is about applying it for what's your space, and that goes for whether there's specific areas with Indigenous cultural heritage, specific areas that have very high environmental values that need to be protected. It goes for specific safety issues related to different activities. So that's, I guess, part of this context of putting it all together. So use your own knowledge, but use the standards and the good practice guides to shape that as you go through. Just having a quick look again at the questions. So there's a question there asking, will CORF have capacity to support organisations in implementing the AAAS? Thanks for that question, Adrian. We are looking at how we can support it. I guess things like the webinar today, I guess, are a step. Also, the way, the promotions we've given to people about the AAS. We're not going to, we're not intending to have a service where we come out and sit down with you and review all your policies. I guess that's really a consultancy sort of role that people could do. But part of that is it's up to each operator. You're the person who understands the best your operating environment. So I wouldn't like to come in and help someone at one centre and if without having a full understanding of your operating environment. So I think, I'm not saying no, we're not going to help, but if you've got queries about specific sections, yeah, please get in touch with myself or Mark from Corf. But I guess my answer to that question really is, this isn't anything really majorly different to what you've had before. It's a resource that provides a heap of guidance, but my take on it is every one of you has the capacity to review your standards, your standard operating procedures, and compare it to this and update it. So it's not something we're going to come around and audit you all and say, oh, good work, you've done a wonderful job here, or there's room for improvement. It's up to the industry, I guess, to make those decisions for each of your operations. There has been discussion previously about some sort of auditing role, but it hasn't really been taken up at the moment. So I guess there's potentially going to be maybe there's space for a consultant to jump into that space, but I think everyone probably has enough internal knowledge to be able to do that service for themselves, is my take on that one. Hope I've answered the question correctly, Adrian. I'm just having a quick scroll through the questions as well, as far as if there are other questions. Might just move on to the next slide, and if there are any questions, please keep on asking, because that's what we're here for. This next one is really just a bit of a summary of where we're at, but we still do have a little bit of time if anyone does have any burning questions. As I said earlier, you'll get an email from the webinar software immediately after it. It's just a thank you for attending. We will also send you an email with a link to a survey about the webinar and about future offerings you'd like to see from Corf. And that's about us getting some feedback which will improve how we operate and ensure we're staying relevant to our industry. If you want some more information about Corf and the outdoor industry across Queensland and across the country, just consider signing up to the Corf e-news. We put out monthly e-newsletters, and it's filled with wonderful information. And we also send out special bulletins from time to time. But we're also conscious of the fact that we don't want to overload our subscribers. We don't want to end up in the spam bin. So, yeah, if you want to sign up to that Corf e-news, we'll try not to spam you too much. If you've got specific queries about the AAS, whether as a result of this webinar or after this webinar, or even as you go through and do a review of your policies and procedures, please get in touch with your friendly state peak body. So Corf has offered to extend our assistance beyond just the Queensland operators. I shouldn't say just, beyond the wonderful Queensland operators, and also any operators in the Northern Territory. We're happy to handle any questions from the Territory. Be really happy to speak with anyone from up there. Outdoors New South Wales has offered to help people in the ACT, and Outdoors Victoria has offered to help people from Tasmania. So for the other states, please just go to your, as I said, your friendly state peak body if you have any queries. As I said earlier, the slides and a recording of the webinar will be available on the Corf website, and possibly on the other websites like the standalone Australian AAS website and the ACA website. And we'll also look at any other questions and answers and putting them on our website. So I'm just having a scroll through, just looking. There was one there, it was a little bit on what I've was talking there before about offering auditing services for risk management plans or other organisations that do that. So it's not something that Core specifically offers. There are some consultants out there who can do that space in relation to risk management or safety management plans. And I guess it's really a matter of finding someone who has the, I guess, ability to understand your operating environment and ensuring that they understand that as well as you do. So there's a bit of a challenge in any of that auditing space is you've got to understand the space that, sorry, the auditor has to understand the space that you operate in. So that's the key part of that. But I would suggest if you're going to engage a consultant, just probably take the time, think about the time required from you to get the consultant up to speed so that they can do a thorough audit of your processes, and just consider that in the when the auditor, when you're talking to someone who might be going to do an audit for you, make sure they've sort of considered that in their world of in their quote or however your discussions with them, make sure they're conscious of that. There'll be some auditors who can come along and pick up your environment really quickly based on their experience, and that's terrific. If you find someone like that, I would suggest, having a good chat to them and seeing how that works. But you also need to be confident with them, because you don't want to just hand over your procedures to someone to write, because at the end of the day, you have to follow those procedures. So, you need to be aware of what's in there, and you need to also be comfortable with everything that's being recommended, that it is practical and applicable to your operating environment. There's no point just copying an operating procedure from someone else who, even if they're the best operator in the world, if they're operating in a different type of environment to you, those procedures won't work for you. So I'd just be, I guess, not necessarily a word of caution, just my experience is you want to make sure that your procedures work for you. So don't dismiss getting someone in to audit your procedures, but also just consider what expertise you have in-house. Sometimes, particularly in volunteer organisations, it's amazing what experience people have once you have a few conversations with people and actually dig a little bit deeper. I'm just going to scroll through. There's a question there about the review schedule, especially in light of the fact that the new training package has been released. So there hasn't been a commitment to a funding for a review of the Australian Adventure Activity Standards at this point, but it is that the AAS, you'll see in there when you go through, it talks about the different types of qualifications for leaders, and one of the things it says, it talks about VET qualifications, so vocational education training. I think it's one of the first acronym slip-ups I've had without defining it. So it does talk about the qualifications in different types. It doesn't say you must have qualifications under this specific training package. It talks about quals quite generally. It also references tertiary qualifications, and it also talks about lived experience or on-the-job experience as a way of being qualified. So it's been deliberately left so that this document will apply even though the training package might be updated from time to time. And that was about having that flexibility in this standard so it would work. My personal take on it is it probably will need to be reviewed in the next 5 or so years. It's a massive project. It's taken, it'd be on 5 years, maybe a bit longer now, to actually get from the start of this project to where we are now with those good practice guides for all those activities released. So I'm guessing it's going to be in a few years' time rejigged, but that also is dependent on funding. So this has been a pretty full-on project, which, as I said earlier, Outdoors Victoria took the lead on, had Murray Irwin dedicating his time to this project, and a whole lot of Andrew Knight's time, the CEO of the Outdoors Victoria, was dedicated to this project. So, as well as others on the steering committee, but Andrew put in a lot of time into it. So it is a big commitment, and it does require funding, which we were lucky enough to get from the various governments around the country, which is awesome. And we do need to acknowledge that this has been made possible with government funding. So as far as implementation goes, we don't have money to go out and roll all this out. It's part of this while we're doing the webinar today, trying to get as many people as possible aware of what's going on in this space and how it works. I hope that answers the question, Adrian, although I'm not sure it did. We've got a question there from Carl about thoughts regarding improving documentation. If policies are already in place, thoughts regarding the need to update them to the framework as presented. So I think on that one, Carl, it's a good question. You know, like I said earlier, if you've already got policies in place, don't think you necessarily have to start again from scratch. My take on it is what the best option is, if you've got policies and procedures that you're confident in, compare them to what's in the new documents, the AAS and the good practice guides. Be quite critical, have a look at it, and go from there. But it's not about, oh no, there's a whole new standard, I'm going to have to start from scratch. It's really about, if you're confident with what you've got now, see if there's anything in there that might be able to improve it, and use it as an opportunity to do that as a review. So the other part of this, which I haven't really talked about, is if there are land managers and water managers out there who tell you that as a condition of entering their land, you must comply with the adventure activity standards. So if that's a condition of their permits, and it is in some places, it has been a condition that you comply with the state adventure activity standards. It hasn't been in Queensland in the past, as far as I know. I don't think there's any land managers who've had a strict rule on that, but I'm not sure about in the Territory, but I know there has been in other states. It is within the land managers' right, land and water managers, to actually put those sort of conditions on a permit. So there's an added incentive, I suppose, to be able to show that you comply with the adventure activity standard, which is an industry-led document. So I guess that's another part of this that you might want to consider when you do your review, is it might mean that you're better placed if that does come in as a condition of a commercial permit or a permit to access those spaces. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen, and if any land managers are on the webinar, please don't take that as a hint that I think you should do that. I think you should actually consider the policies and procedures that each operator has, and also specific conditions that are relevant to your operating environment. If you've got a permit system, that permit system should be reflective of your priorities as an organisation, and also the reasons that you might be protecting different areas of your land that you may want to ensure aren't disturbed. So I guess the other one is timing of any updates. So these standards have been endorsed, but as peak bodies, we've actually been suggesting that as far as rollout of new policies and procedures, that there is time needed to be able to implement any changes to policies and procedures. So we've already been involved in discussions about that, and looking at that. My take on it is, when you're due to review your operating procedures, you definitely want to consider that the Australian Adventure Activity Standard and Good Practice Guides is now part of the environment that you operate in. Just as if there was a change in relation to how you access the space, then you'd have to include that in your policies or procedures. So, I guess this is just another part of that. It's a part of the environment that you operate in. So, that's sort of the space I would say in that when you're updating your policies and procedures, make sure you're considering this, but it's not a matter of if you don't have it done by the 31st of December this year, then you can't operate. It's still a voluntary system, but you just need to consider if there are any other extra pressures that are going to hasten your alignment with these standards. But they are voluntary, as I've said. They were always intended to be voluntary, but you need to just consider that sort of approach to it all. We've got about 8 minutes left. I'm just going to scroll through and check for any more questions. Oh, good. Carl said that helped what I said. That's wonderful to get positive feedback. And speaking of feedback, don't forget, we've still got that link there to the survey, and we'll send you that email. So, and positive feedback's always welcome. It makes me feel good about myself. It also, just reinforces that what we're doing is helpful to you. I guess the fact that everyone hasn't jumped off and gone and had your lunch, that's probably a good sign, but we'd also appreciate any feedback that you want to give us as we go through from that survey. And that applies to anything that CORF's doing at any time. Always happy to get feedback on what we're doing. It's, if not just the brickbats, also if you think we've done a good job on something, it's always nice to hear it. So let us know on those ones. But if you think of something specific that you'd like to see addressed, more than happy to hear about that, and we might put our thinking caps on and do that. Just a little bit of shameless advertising too. We're actually going to do a little bit of work and put a survey out to all our members in the next little while, separate to this one about the webinar. So our members should look out for that too, that we'll get a survey out to them, hopefully before Christmas. We've just got to work out the system we're going to use to do that, and we'll get that happening too. So that's, just to keep an eye out for that, and we might have some more information on that in our next e-news, which will be the end of this week. So it'll be the 30th of November. Gee, November's almost done. Anyway, so before I ramble on too much, it looks like a few people haven't got any more questions on there. A few people have thanked us for an excellent job and a great job, which is lovely to see. So thank you to those who've made those comments. And on that note, I think maybe I'm happy enough to close off now. I think a quick meeting's a good meeting. Apologies again for the technical difficulties in the middle, but it wouldn't be a PowerPoint presentation without a technical glitch at some point. So I hope you've enjoyed the webinar today. And again, I guess just to finish, I'd really like to thank you all for the work that you do in our industry, whether it's in Queensland, in the Northern Territory, or the other states. Just, maybe it's just give yourselves a bit of a pat on the back every now and again when you think that we're in a pretty good industry, and I think there's some wonderful operators out there. And the reason the industry is healthy is because of the skills and the passion of the people who work and volunteer in this space. So I just wanted to finish with give yourselves a high five, which is a way of clapping. But thank you very much for your attendance today, and we will send that survey out shortly. So thanks very much, everyone. Feel free to get in touch. See you soon. Bye.